I never imagined that something as simple as trying to save money on electricity and help the planet would turn into a neighborhood war. When I installed my solar panels, I thought I was making a smart, forward-thinking investment. The sleek black panels gleamed under the summer sun, a silent promise of lower bills and clean energy. My neighbors complimented me at first, but then, just 3 days later, a letter appeared in my mailbox. It was from the HOA. The header was stamped in bold red, "Violation Notice." My stomach sank as I unfolded the paper. According to them, my panels were visually disruptive and in violation of community aesthetics. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of mistake. My panels weren't an eyesore. They looked modern, clean, and, frankly, better than the peeling paint on half the houses on our street. But the letter was real, and it was only the beginning. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my door. Standing there was Marlene, our HOA president and the unofficial queen of neighborhood pettiness. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, a visor, and an expression that could sour milk. She held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "We need to talk about your panels," she said in a tone that made it sound like I'd installed a missile launcher on my roof. I invited her in, but she declined, preferring to stand in the driveway where everyone could see. "They're non-compliant," she declared, tapping the clipboard. "You need to have them removed by next week or face daily fines." My jaw dropped. "Non-compliant according to what?" I asked. "Our community standards," she replied, as if those words alone ended the conversation. That night, I dug through the HOA bylaws, reading page after page until my eyes blurred. There was nothing that prohibited solar panels. In fact, the state had a solar access law protecting homeowners like me. And that's when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was personal. The next morning, I noticed a ladder leaning against my fence. Someone had climbed up to take photos of my roof. The moment they saw me, they scurried off like a thief in the night. By the afternoon, new letters were taped to my door. They claimed the panels were unsafe, that they posed a glare hazard to drivers, and even suggested they might attract lightning. The accusations were absurd, but they were relentless. Then came the fines, $50 a day, each notice printed with the word urgent in bright red. My friends told me to lawyer up, but I wanted to try diplomacy first. I attended the next HOA meeting, armed with printouts of the bylaws and state law. As I presented my case, Marlene interrupted me at every turn. She smirked as other board members nodded along with her, clearly under her thumb. When I cited the solar access law, her smile faltered, but only for a second. "We'll see about that," she said as she adjourned the meeting. Days later, I woke to the sound of banging. My heart raced as I threw on a robe and ran outside. 2 men in reflective vests were on my roof, removing my panels. I shouted for them to stop, and they froze. They told me they had been authorized by the HOA to perform an emergency safety removal. Furious, I demanded to see the order. They couldn't produce one. I threatened to call the police, and that's when they climbed down and left. The rage boiling inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. They had crossed the line from harassment into something criminal. That night, I contacted an attorney, someone known for taking on rogue HOAs. We filed a cease and desist, along with a formal complaint to the state's housing authority. And while we waited for the legal gears to turn, I decided to fight back in my own way. I started digging into Marlene's history, the HOA's financials, and their past disputes. What I found was explosive. The HOA had lost 3 previous lawsuits over arbitrary aesthetic violations, costing the community tens of thousands of dollars. Worse, Marlene's own backyard contained multiple violations: unapproved structures, non-standard fencing, and a shed painted neon blue. I documented everything. Then, with my lawyer's blessing, I called for a special homeowners meeting. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Residents whispered as I set up a projector. Marlene tried to dismiss me before I could speak, but the room erupted in protest. I clicked to the first slide, photos of her violations. Gasps filled the air. I walked everyone through the legal protections for solar panels, showing them the exact clauses from state law. Then I revealed the lawsuits they had kept secret, lawsuits that had drained our community fund. By the end of my presentation, the mood in the room had shifted completely. People who had once stayed silent were now demanding Marlene's resignation. She tried to shout over them, but the tide had turned. A motion was passed to remove her from the board. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Marlene stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. 2 weeks later, the HOA sent me a formal apology and confirmed my panels were in full compliance. But the story didn't end there. The state's housing authority found the HOA had violated my rights under the solar access law, and they were fined heavily. Part of that fine went directly to me as damages. I used the money to upgrade my solar system, adding a battery backup so I'd never have to rely on the grid again. Now, when the sun sets and my lights stay on while the rest of the block goes dark during outages, I can't help but think about the irony. Marlene fought to take away my panels, and in the end, she gave me the means to make them even better. Neighbors often stop by to ask about my setup, and I'm more than happy to share my experience, along with a warning about standing up to the wrong person. Because sometimes, the fight you didn't ask for becomes the one that changes everything. And in this case, it turned a petty HOA battle into my ultimate victory.